I'm Jan Bakker, I'm the founder and CEO of FLUIDDA. We founded FLUIDDA about 12 years ago, and one of the main reasons to start the company was really to solve some of the challenges that we face in respiratory medicine today. And one of the main challenges is that the current way of looking at the lung function really doesn't allow us to understand how diseased the lung exactly is. So you don't get any regional information. You kind of get an overall picture of the lung, but you don't know on a regional level whether the lung is still healthy or diseased. And that also means that patients or people in general can be already more affected by lung diseases than physicians or doctors might suspect. So what we did is we started developing what we now call functional respiratory imaging, which essentially combines low-dose, high-resolution CT scans with methods from aerospace engineering. So my background is in aerospace engineering, where the main focus was on using computers to simulate flows. So you can actually use a computer to understand how flow is behaving either over an aircraft wing, in engines, etc. So we're using the same principle now in the respiratory system in order to gain a better understanding of the regional lung structure and the regional lung function. And we have different aims with this technology. One of the aims is really to speed up drug development, so really work with pharma companies, medical device companies to accelerate the development of better treatments, so actually better treatments for the right patients. And we're also working increasingly more with individual hospitals and physicians to use the technology, again, to match the right patient to the right treatment. One of the additional challenges in using imaging as an endpoint or as a tool is that, especially if you're using regional information, we somehow have to collect all the information and summarize it into a parameter that makes sense and that can be used to select the right treatment, for instance. And that's where things like machine learning, artificial intelligence come in quite handy, because you can use the computers to really look at patterns that are very hard to distinguish just by looking at these images. So in the more conventional setting, you have a radiologist that looks at the CT scans and tries to identify patterns. With functional respiratory imaging, the computer actually reconstructs these images into the anatomical structure, and then the machine learning approach really looks for patterns that are either predictive of future clinical events like exacerbations, or the computer can also point towards the right treatments in terms of responder phenotypes, etc. So one of the topics that unfortunately has become quite relevant in the last couple of months is the exposure to wildfires. So we actually had an office in California, in Los Angeles, and we were confronted with an increasing number and intensity of wildfires. And of course, wildfires, they create these particles, airborne particles, which people in the cities inhale. And of course, one of the groups that is particularly exposed to this particulate matter are the firefighters. So if you combine the fact that you have increased exposure in this group with the fact that the way of looking at the respiratory system is not very sensitive, you potentially run into a situation where lung diseases start to develop, and that probably goes undetected for quite a while in this group. So one of the things that we are initiating now is the FIGHT project, which stands for Firefighter General Health and Treatment Program. Within the FIGHT project, we really like to see how we can use our new technology, functional respiratory imaging, in combination with artificial intelligence and machine learning, to really help this group of firefighters, first responders, to really keep them healthy, to make sure that no adverse events are occurring in this group. And the reason why we are looking at wildfire exposure in general in more detail is some of the initial research that we did with the University of California, Davis, where we actually used our technology already to look at the effect of wildfire exposure in primates. So in 2008, there was also an intense period of wildfires here in California. And University of California, Davis has a cohort of monkeys that was exposed to these wildfires. And they took CT scan of this cohort that was exposed to wildfires at a very young age, and they were able to compare it with CTs from the monkeys from the cohort of the year after. That cohort was not exposed by monkeys. If you look at the FRI parameters and the results of the study, you already see profound effects of exposure to wildfires at a young age. So that made us think that potentially the effect of these exposures are much more significant than what we might anticipate. That's where I think, especially in the group of the firefighters and first responders, it becomes quite relevant to look at these groups in more detail and use sensitive technology to really understand what is going on. The importance of the topic of wildfires and actually the use of artificial intelligence in general has gotten more and more attention in the press recently, with journals like Nature and magazines like Forbes picking up these items. And we were lucky enough that functional respiratory imaging was featured in some of them in the last couple of months. And this really helps to create awareness about the topic. It also helps to create awareness about the need for better technologies, more innovation in the respiratory field, and actually in the field of medicine in general. So one of the other events where there was a lot of exposure to firefighters and first responders were, of course, the 9/11 events, where the World Trade Center came down. And we are teaming up with the researchers that are studying these firefighters. And we'd like to see if our imaging technology can help them understand better what is actually happening in the lungs of these people, and also if we can somehow help them to receive better treatments. Because one of the things that we see over the last 17 years is that there is an increased mortality, there is increased morbidity in these patients, in these firefighters. And of course, if you can do something to help them, to really help a group that risked their lives to save ours, pretty much, I think that's something worthwhile doing.